British Schools Foundation was founded by government orders in 1967. Many years, but unlike most other international schools in Hong Kong, ESF has received a subvention from the government. This was generally accepted until recent years, when the subsidy has been surrounded by controversy. In June 2013, a decision was made to phase out and eventually get rid of the 283 million Hong Kong dollars subvention.
It's there because many of the people who went to Island School particularly, but then other ESF schools, were government employees. So therefore the government felt that they ought to put some money into that. The difficulty became obviously in 1997 with the handover to the Chinese, because it's not obvious why the Chinese government or a Chinese-backed government would subvent or subsidise the education of people in the international sector.
I think this is quite an important policy for Hong Kong being an international city. On the one hand, it's a colonial legacy, but on the other hand, I think even after the handover, I would see the increasing importance of subvention to be retained to have international education more affordable for many middle-class families. My concern is about whether education has become less and less affordable as far as I'm concerned, but really more about Hong Kong's competitiveness, about Hong Kong's status as a global city, about whether or not Hong Kong would continue to be attractive enough to talent from around the world. Speaking with the government and see to what extent better arrangements could be made. This decision has been made without involving LegCo, without involving the parents very closely.
The decision has been taken to remove the subvention and is something ESF has accepted.
So now we're at the stage that we have to determine a long-term financial plan strategy so that ESF continue to be financially sustainable and will carry on without subvention.
I don't think that there would be many other options. I mean, the government can be providing cheaper lands or funding for renovating the school premises or subsidies for all sorts of other school services. But I think these sort of bits and pieces of subsidies here and there would not really solve the problem.
The fact that they are paying a subvention, in a sense, gives them the right to make some decisions. At the moment they haven't done, but one might consider that if they carried it on, they might feel that in return they would want more of that power. And I think that would be unacceptable to all of the ESF schools.
I think at the end of the day, we do need to go back and revisit the whole situation.
Well, the current plan is to start phasing out the subsidy from 2016 onwards, and the phase out will be a total of 13-year period. It's in terms of sort of the timing and everything, I think we give parents enough time to sort of get ready, get prepared. So all the stakeholders are well informed, well in advance what's going to happen in the future.
The plan also includes that any students who join us in year one would not be given this subvention, but if a student joined that same year in one of the other years, that they would be paying the same fees as the cohort. The plan has been thought through and there's a rationale behind the decisions that we've taken. We're being fair, but we're doing something that seems to be manageable.
So I think from that perspective, it's a relatively good plan. I mean, there's obviously a lot of benefit to our parent bodies if the subsidy is kept on going, because as I mentioned, the subsidy is about 80-90% of our revenue. Then we need to sort of find an alternative way to sort of cover that gap, and inevitably some of it will be on the parents.
Well, I think education, especially international education, would become more and more expensive and quite intimidating. Maybe at the end of the day, just about 1 or 2% of Hong Kong families could afford international education. I would see two developments. One, families would grow increasingly unhappy, and two, talent from around the world would be intimidated. They might think twice, if not more, that coming to Hong Kong is not going to be worth it.
We have to find other ways of raising income. So part of that would be looking at fees, and another part would be to look at how efficient we are running ESF. So we'll be looking at schools and we'll be looking at the centre, and we'll be ensuring that all our practices are efficient so that we drive down our costs.
Will it change the character of our school? Well, it might a bit. It might change slightly the demographic of the people who come to our school. There may be some people who can afford to come now but wouldn't be able to afford to come in, say, 7 or 8 years' time when that phasing out hits the secondary school. What we can't do is cut down on our income. We don't have any surplus ever. We spend everything that we've got on teaching, on keeping the facilities, on the resources that we need to provide a good education. So it's not an option for us to say we'll just exist with less money. Whatever the decision is, it is good to have the decision made and sorted and the discussion out of the way.
But positively ahead to how we can secure ESF's position in Hong Kong without having to rely on the subvention.